It's been in the headlines a lot recently, as abortion has once again become a hotly contested issue in the United States. Laura Briggs, UMass Amherst professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and the author of How All Politics Became Reproductive Politics, spoke with Carrie Saldo about the politics and history of abortion in the United States.
Well, the big question before Roe v. Wade was birth control. And up until 1972, people were still battling about whether unmarried women could get birth control. And so there were court decisions that affected that. And so it was 1973, of course, that Roe v. Wade was decided by the Supreme Court that made abortion legal.
Right. And so huge change in the landscape, to your point, if we're grappling over just the idea of birth control and who should have rights to it, or if anyone should have rights to it. And now all of a sudden, abortion is the law of the land. What was happening once that decision was made?
The Roe case was a Texas case, and people associated with the University of Texas at Austin were trying to get abortion rights through their local health clinic. And some very young lawyers decided to litigate that case. And so it came up through the court system. And in 1973, when the case was decided, actually it was decided the same day that LBJ, the former president, died. And so there were no headlines about Roe v. Wade.
So it was just buried at the time, essentially, because of the death of the president.
Right.
Wow.
And so information actually slowly leaked out, particularly to people who were engaged in abortion rights activism. And many people thought that what Roe v. Wade was going to do was really give women total rights to make their own decisions about their bodies. It gave us a trimester framework. Abortion couldn't be limited in the first trimester, the first 3 months of pregnancy, and minimal limits in the second trimester.
And so now that question of 24 weeks, we hear it a lot. And even more recently, when you look at the southern states, the way that they've approached abortion as of late, several of them anyway, looking at this concept of a heartbeat bill, which has become very popular and discussed now. So here we are in 2019. Supreme Court made its decision in 1973. Why are we even still debating and discussing this?
Well, there's a very active anti-abortion movement that has been trying to find a legal framework in which to challenge Roe. And some people say that in 1992 with Casey v. Webster, Roe, in fact, was overturned. We lost the trimester framework with the Casey decision in 1992 and said that the states couldn't place an undue burden on the right to abortion. And so from 1973 until 1992, there were 360 anti-abortion bills passed in state legislatures up and down the country. So every time there's been a shift in the Supreme Court, and state legislatures, those controlled particularly by Republicans, it almost never happens when they're controlled by Democrats, have passed restrictive abortion bills and tried to create something that can go to the Supreme Court and be decided and potentially overturn Roe.
So the pressure has been building there, as you say. And now, is it, in your opinion, because Judge Kavanaugh joined the Supreme Court, that now this issue has become so much in the limelight again? That's
right. Every time there seems to be potentially a shift in the conservative composition of the court, somebody will pass a big anti-abortion bill, or several states will. But we've been doing this steadily since the 1970s.
But do you think the issue is being discussed differently now?
Well, in 1991, Utah passed a bill to completely overturn Roe v. Wade, to ban abortion in all circumstances, much as Alabama did. So it's an effort to put another test case before the Supreme Court. And it's not clear, of course, what Judge Kavanaugh will do and what the court will do with the new laws that the states have passed.
You pointed out a few minutes ago that Massachusetts years ago wasn't among those states where abortion was legal. Now we do have a Republican governor, Charlie Baker, and he came out shortly after Judge Kavanaugh was put on the bench and worked with legislators, paraphrasing what he said essentially, to secure abortion rights here in Massachusetts, sort of looking at the laws on the books, removing some of those antiquated ones that he felt could have been chipped away at, and to make abortion illegal here in Massachusetts potentially. That shift in Massachusetts politics, was it a quick shift? Was it a slower shift?
It was gradual, and it's as abortion has become more closely associated with political parties. Massachusetts is a predominantly Democratic state, has secured abortion rights more firmly.
So for you look at women, gender, and sexuality studies at UMass Amherst. You're also an author. Your most recent book looks at All Politics Are Reproductive Politics. That's the title of the book. How do you see that title as it relates to this larger abortion debate right now?
Well, obviously, as we're looking at 2020, we're looking at, again, a polarized field in which many Republicans, including Donald Trump, are advocating strongly for an end to abortion rights. And as big as the Democratic field is, all of the Democratic candidates have suggested one way or another that they are pro-choice.
So you see this remaining an issue as we click towards 2020?
Well, abortion rights is a perennial issue. And as soon as there's a shift in one direction, there's a shift in another direction. So, for example, in the last few weeks, since 8 states have passed very restrictive abortion laws, we've seen a change in how people think about abortion. So we've gone from seeing 50% of the country to supporting abortion rights to, in the most recent Reuters poll, 58% of the country supporting abortion rights. But abortion is, of course, not the only issue. The other issue that takes in a broad swath of our politics is a framework that some have suggested we should call reproductive justice, which means not only should we be concerned about the right to terminate a pregnancy if women aren't prepared to carry it to term and have a baby and raise a baby, but all the things that go into raising children or having children when you want them or having birth under the circumstances that you want it. And so when you think about big issues like schools, housing, economics, if we think of these all together as reproductive justice issues, the conditions that it takes to raise a child, then it's very hard to think of much that's outside the realm of reproductive justice and reproductive politics.
Where do you think men fit into this issue? I mean, certainly we have the majority of male lawmakers involved in the process of these laws that we've seen passed in many of these southern states. So you could argue that men are very involved in a certain sense. But I'm more interested in having you think about the process of men being involved when it comes to their 50% of the DNA here.
Right. So reproduction has been defined as a women's issue because abortion is fundamentally about women's bodily integrity. Do I have the freedom to be a full citizen if I have a uterus and I can get pregnant against my will or at times I don't want to? So those are fundamental issues of reproductive rights. But it's also true that for men, the decision to have or not have children with or without a partner, with or without in a heterosexual relationship, who's going to, how are people going to negotiate the work of child rearing? How are people going to negotiate the economics of child rearing? I think those are very much men's issues.